Welcome to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor from the capital of Florida, Tallahassee. We're up here for the book tour, and happy to say that Carm, my beloved mother, who I just forced out of an Uber at a crazy pace because I was going to be late for the podcast, and she's screaming at me. She was honored tonight up here in Tallahassee by an amazing organization, HERC, which stands for the Holocaust Educational Research Council, the Holocaust Educational Research Council, and they do amazing work. They actually teach teachers the resources they need to teach the Holocaust in schools, and it's a very important organization, and they're spreading far beyond Tallahassee. So it was a beautiful night. People asking Carm a lot of questions. The only problem with the day, I was just telling Bob Motta and Josh, because Sky was on a call for a moment, is that we were up at 4:30. So if I sound like I'm out of my mind today, that's what that is all attributable to. Of course, we are going to be covering Karen Read today. I did catch a good portion of testimony today, thanks to YouTube, thanks to my YouTube channel. I was watching it here in Tallahassee. Of course, it is getting, I wouldn't say down to the wire, but we're getting deeper into the weeds and woods here with what is going on with all things Karen Read at the trial, which is going on in Dedham, Massachusetts, in Norfolk County. So here to break down what happened, that faithful, there it is, the Holocaust Education Resource Council, Jared Ross, an attorney himself, was at the dinner tonight. It was actually amazing to meet Jared in person, and we're doing a book signing for anyone who's in Tallahassee tomorrow night at Hearth and Soul. For those who do not know, the two of you in the world, this is Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that brings you the best guests in true crime, and you're about to find out why. Of course, the person at the center of this, we often forget, is Boston police officer John O'Keefe, who died the evening of January 29th, 2022 under some mysterious circumstances. Bob Motta, his wife Allie, who I love, yelled at me, said, "You always call him a family attorney. He's really criminal defense." He does both. He does it all. He is part of the Motta Motta law firm in the great city of Chicago. We will be there for the book tour in July, and Bob will be a guest of honor along with his wife. Bob Motta's father, best known for defending serial killer John Wayne Gacy, and Bob hosts Defense Diaries podcast. Next up, she's finishing up a call because she, unlike these two, she is a high-powered attorney dealing in real business, and this is Sky Lazaro, an experienced corporate and criminal defense attorney. She has defended very high-profile criminals, including most recently Corey Richins, who's accused of poisoning her now deceased husband with 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl. She is no longer Corey's attorney, but she is here to talk about Karen Read. And last but not least, and I finally met him in person at CrimeCon in Nashville, Josh Ritter, as nice on camera as he is in person. And the guy's fit. He is a fit man, fit, handsome man. Josh Ritter, named 2015 Outstanding Prosecutor of the Year. He is now a partner at El Dabe Ritter Trial Lawyers. He hosts True Crime Daily, The Sidebar, but he has a new podcast called Courtroom Confidential. If you want to hear about the inner workings of certain cases, you want to check out his podcast, and of course, Defense Diaries. Without further ado, let's jump into Karen Read here. Day 20 of testimony. We had a full day today, and we have a half day tomorrow. Alan Jackson said this trial should be over by July 4th, which is about 4 weeks. Josh Ritter, do you buy it? Will this trial be over before we celebrate America's birthday. And by the way, See Me Sharp says, Josh looks like he smells really good. Yes, he does. He got a great whiff of him, and he smells fantastic.
He does. He does. I can second that. He smells fantastic.
Yeah, beautiful. Yes. So will this be over by July 4th, Josh Ritter?
Not the way things are going. It really depends on, I don't know when Alan made that comment, but this seems to be taking so much longer than anybody expected. Part of that is due to the judge and this kind of wacky schedule that we have where we get a day here and a day there and a half day here. And then she's, taking the jurors' lunchtime away from them to try to pack in some more testimony and everything. But it's also just dragging on. And I think today was a good demonstration of how the prosecution, the Commonwealth, to me, they have realized that if they don't present everything, that the defense is going to somehow exploit that. And I think the defense is starting to get inside their heads, and they're realizing, okay, we're not going to leave any stone unturned. I fully believe if this case was not getting the attention that it has been getting, nationwide and cameras in the courtroom, this thing probably would have been over by now. But with all of the attention, the schedule that they've had, and the defense and what they've done to this case, it just seems to be dragging on. But like I said, today, we sucked up how many hours of courtroom time following a car as it made its way from the crime scene to a garage and then to another garage. And it was just all to trace where that vehicle had been, I think, to cut off preemptively any argument that the defense was trying to make about somebody messing with it along the way. So now they're presenting everything. If this was a normal case that no one was paying attention to, which are like thousands of cases taking place throughout the country, then they would have just said, oh, and then we took the car. An officer would have said, we took the car and we eventually brought it back to the station. And that would have been that. But instead we had, 20, 30 minutes of videotape showing us where the vehicle had been. If that's the way the rest of this case is going to go, then July, what did he say? Beginning of July?
By the way, he said it earlier this week, which means Monday or Tuesday, and he said by July 4th.
Yeah, I just don't think so, especially when we haven't gotten to the medical examiner. We're starting to get into some of the forensics, but really not the meat and potatoes of the whole thing. And then you still have the defense case. So I don't think so. I think that's ambitious. And
by the way, Josh Ritter worked with criminal defense attorney Alan Jackson. We're going to get his take on that in a few minutes. Sky, I'm not sure. Thumbs up? Are you off the call?
I'm back. Sorry. I've got a client detained in the Congo. So,
hey.
I have never said that in my life.
Never boring. It's never boring. Okay.
Ritter and Motta are clowns compared to you. Only real attorneys have clients detained in the Congo.
They smell better apparently though. So, there's that. I don't know. I can't compete with that.
Can I ask you what they're detained for in the Congo? Am I allowed to ask that question?
Yeah, there's a kid from Utah who supposedly went on a vacation with a friend to South Africa and is now detained for attempting a coup. You might want to do a show on it. It's very
wow. I have heard about this.
We'll see.
Wow, that's insane. So we're going to have to check this out. This is not my question, Sky, but it is Rosemary Romero's. Why did Sky Lazaro decide to stop representing Corey Richins? Are you allowed to comment at all?
It was not a decision that I made for any other reason than there arose a conflict within the estate case that my firm represented her in, and the firm made the unilateral decision that we were all off.
There you go. Breaking news on STS, like we always do, related to Corey Richins accused of poisoning her husband with 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl, and Sky's firm no longer able to represent because of a conflict with the civil side. So,
gee, how lucky!
Yeah,
I know.
Man,
they just heard it. You all just heard it here first. Sky, Karen Reed. It is one of the most bizarre trials that I have covered. It is crazy. There's no winning in the court of public opinion, because no matter what you say, people are coming at you. They come at me. They will come at you. It is a crazy, bizarre story with a lot of really even more bizarre coincidences. Your bird's eye view of this case, what do you make of it?
Fascinating. First of all, I'm always on the wrong side of public opinion, so I'm fairly comfortable with that. Aside from this, this is a really interesting case. It'll be really interesting to see what the defense puts on. You know, I have talked with Ellen on the phone on a different issue. I think the defense is doing a really good job of raising some issues through their cross-examination. That being said, when you do things like that, you better have something when you present your case to back it up, because if you don't, I think jurors can punish you for it, you know, a little bit. So I don't know, like there's some stuff in this case, you know, that the phone calls are weird, you know, the mismatch, you know, the not being able to match the glass, the way the crime scene was investigated or not investigated. I mean, I've done a lot of cases, and crime scenes are preserved for a reason. I understand snowstorms make it hard. I live in a place where it snows a lot. But that being said, you don't take snow blowers and rakes and start disrupting crime scenes. The other thing I think that is interesting and is this happened, or the people that other people who were at least maybe witnesses work for this police agency. So normally when that happens, it's sent to a different agency to investigate. So, you know, if it involves a bunch of Canton police officers who are at least potential witnesses, if nothing else, right? Even if the defense is wrong and all these people are potential witnesses, it really probably should have been investigated by a different agency than where everybody works, because I think that creates, it just creates a problem. It creates, if nothing else, just the illusion of impropriety at certain points. And then the defense can raise these arguments that, you know, hey, look, you know, we protect the thin blue line. Like, this is what we do. We got each other's backs. And when you can make that argument, and I think especially now, there's been a little bit of a shift, I think, with some juries and some political feelings about government's overreach and government's prosecution of individuals. And I think if you're not super careful about how you do that procedurally, it really can come back on you.
Bob Motta, Jimmy McNutty, he's been a trial watcher since the OJ days, literally like a professional trial watcher. He is retired aerospace engineer. His comment: the state not only has to prove Karen guilty, they have to prove the Alberts, McCabe's, EMS, fire, and 2 police departments innocent. Does he make a point here? He definitely, you know, he believes Karen is guilty of this. I think that's fair to say. He is a very astute watcher of all trials, particularly this one. But does he make a good point here?
I think it's a valid point. I think that Lally realized it in terms of when you look at the trial strategy that Lally has employed. I mean, he put on a pre-buttal case. Typically, you see everything that he did in the first 3.5 weeks of this trial in rebuttal to what the defense has put on in their case in chief. He knew that's the disadvantage of the defense laying their entire theory of the case out prior to trial. You rarely see it happen. You've seen it happen in this case and also the Rick Allen case in Delphi, Indiana. Those 2 cases in particular, they have laid out their entire third-party culprit defenses for the world to see, which also includes the prosecutor's office. So what Lally did, he said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the wind out of your sails. I'm going to put on your case in chief right at the beginning of my case, and I'm going to back end it with my case against Karen Reed. I kept telling people, I'm like, they're like, where's the case against? They're not proving. I'm like, that's not what they're doing. What he decided to do, and I don't know whether or not the strategy will work ultimately, but he certainly took it upon himself to put on all the witnesses that the defense was going to call. They were going to call the Alberts. They were going to call the McCabe's. They were all coming on through the defense's case in chief if he wasn't going to call them. So he tried to front end that. Whether or not it's going to be effective, like I said, I don't know. But in terms of kind of getting to the nuts and bolts of it, now we're seeing it in the last week, starting last week with the ER doctors. And then he's starting his case against Karen Reed in earnest now. And I'm going to disagree with my distinguished friend and dear friend, Josh Ritter. I think they will get it done. And I don't know if you heard this part in fairness, Josh. Alan came out and said that he thought that he could get their case in chief done in 4 or 5 days. So that number shrunk considerably because they no longer have to call all those people that they were going to call, believing that the state would never call them. So
did he Bob, did he give a number of witnesses? At one point it was 77. Did he give a new number of witnesses he plans to call?
He didn't break it down, but we know it was going to be everybody that was at the bar in the house. So like all those people, he's not going to, I think that the only person he would potentially recall because he didn't cross her would be Carrie Roberts. But as far as everybody else, I think he's, I think they're good with what they did there. The question's going to be, ultimately is Canoni, the judge, is she going to believe that they did enough to really dig into that third party culprit thing in their case in chief, and more importantly, in closing arguments.
I'm going to bounce back the other way now to Sky for a quick answer to this one from Becky Ireland, who's a friend of the show here. Can anyone explain to me, Sky, how these people are going to preserve the record saying objection and giving no explanation as to what the objection is about? What is the answer to that from a legal standpoint?
Every judge runs their trials a little bit differently. Some judges allow what we call speaking objections, where you make an objection and then talk about why in front of the jury, or a sidebar and talk about why. Other judges simply say, note your objection, I'll rule, and we're moving on. So from a preservation standpoint, if she's convicted on appeal, as long as they have made the objection, it's preserved. Now, if they don't make the objection, that's the problem. It doesn't necessarily matter what the basis that the judge overrules an objection on for appellate purposes. It's more important from a trial, strategy standpoint to just preserve the objection, so that if your client's convicted, an appellate attorney can make the argument that they made the objection and the judge got it wrong, or whatever it is. If you don't make the objection at all, then it's presumed waived.
By the way, Sky is getting people freed from the Congo, and C-Dub pointing out, Bob, you've basically been on YouTube for 12 hours. Bob and I live these same pathetic lives. We're grown men spending our time on YouTube.
Yeah, we were sniveling about that quite a bit at CrimeCon too. Joel and I just crying in our beers, metaphorically, because neither of us drink. But we were whining about how hard we work the whole time, just hugging each other, weeping. While our wives looked at us with great disdain.
The only problem there is your wife is actually a criminal defense attorney, and my wife helps me on my podcast. So I think you have the advantage. No offense in terms of that. In terms of that.
I wouldn't mess with my wife. You know what I mean? I wouldn't mess with my wife.
Smart man. More men. Everybody listening, take that advice. It will be good for you.
I would not mess with my wife. Either, even though I'm going to get hate mail for that. Shiraz gifting 5 memberships. Josh Ritter, we've talked about it before. Alan Jackson, kind of a consummate defense attorney. LA a little bit. He's quite slick, nice suits, looks the part, great orator. What was he like to work alongside? When did you work alongside him? What do you think of the job he is doing here?
I think he's doing a fabulous job. I've known him for 15, 20 years. I first started working with him. I was his law clerk when he was in the DA's office, when he was prosecuting Phil Spector. So however long ago that was. And then when I joined the DA's office as a prosecutor, I knew him all during that time I was there, which was about 10 years. And then when I left the DA's office, I joined his defense firm and worked there for about 5 years. So I've seen him on both sides of the courtroom. He is he's about as good as you can get. He's incredibly well prepared. He works with, impeccable diligence, but he's also just got this way about him in a courtroom, and that comes from years and years of experience, but it just comes from natural talents that he has to just handle kind of any situation presented to him and be able to, as we've seen demonstrated in this case, respond on cross, to whatever's kind of thrown at him. He never seems to get rattled. But yeah, he's the out of towner. He's the LA guy. He's a little polished. He's a little slick. It really depends on how jurors are receiving that. If they are watching him and they are loving it, then I think he's got them all lined up. But if they're not appreciating his particular style, he may be having problems because he has not been taking it easy on a lot of these witnesses, especially some of the civilian witnesses that we've seen testify. It's one thing to go after cops. They're professionals. It's kind of the government you're seen as going after. But when you're going after civilians, you better have a really good reason for it. And you better have been given some excuse by that witness. And so if the jurors believe that that witness is not being truthful, is hiding something, is exaggerating something, then the attorney, prosecutor, or defense can go after them all they want. But if that person appears to be trying to just do their best, and that attorney is just going at them, straight for their jugular on every single question, the jurors might not be responding to it too well. So we don't have the benefit of being in the courtroom and seeing how this is being received by the jurors. But I will say that I think just strategically, they've done a tremendous job because of what was pointed out in a question earlier, is that they've really done a remarkable job of putting, to some extent, law enforcement on trial here as well. The police department, the first responders, the investigators. I mean, the fact that we're all talking about when is Proctor going to get called? Is he getting called at all? The fact that that's a question that everyone is asking really shows that to some extent they've turned this case on its head and made it so that the prosecution, the Commonwealth, has been, handling this case on their heels to some extent, and just kind of, as Bob pointed out, trying to address a lot of what they know the defense case is going to be preemptively and front load their case that way. So I think that shows that they've done their job as far as creating a narrative in this entire case.
I want to just follow up on one point on that real quick. I agree with everything you said. I think they've done a great job. And I think it's really hard on the defense to get the prosecution to start talking about your narrative.
Yeah.
And I think anytime you're in trial, whether you're a prosecutor or defense attorney, if the other side is more worried about your narrative, that they're essentially putting on a rebuttal case or buying into your narrative instead of kind of disregarding it, like they don't know what they're talking about, they're the defense, of course they're going to tell you a bunch of stuff. When they start buying into it in kind of some subtle ways, it lends it some credibility.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's one thing for the prosecution to have the burden to begin with, but when the defense starts throwing a bunch of their own narrative at them, that creates an even heavier burden for them to have to answer. And I think that's an excellent point that you make, that they definitely do seem to be trying to spend a lot of their time, and by that I mean Lolly and the Commonwealth, responding to what the defense has already done.
Anjanette Levy, a good friend who was at CrimeCon with us and hosts on Law and Crime. I agree with Bob Motta on what Lally is doing with the state's case. They did the same thing in the Avery case, Stephen Avery, in 2007. They called all the people accused of the frame up to shut it down. We will see here. There was also a comment about the tail light. They really got into that today, and we're going to ask our panel if that helped the Commonwealth. Look, I'm one of these guys. I admit it. I am fairly easily persuadable by attorneys. Whatever they say, I sort of believe. I'm an idiot. But today I thought was a good day for the Commonwealth. That is going to get me hate right there. The shaming of Jay. If you haven't watched his show, please do. Bob's on there with him a lot. I'm never invited, but maybe I will be. Don't forget to scan Bob's QR code. What is this? Defense Diary Pod is fire. So there you go. Can you scan that? Because Bob's left shoulder is blocking it. I
Well,
don't
let's
even
see.
know.
Oh,
Otherwise,
yeah.
you couldn't be a weatherman. You got to slide your chair to a hair to the
Yeah.
right. There you
I don't
go.
understand how cameras work, man.
Look at this. Shaming of Jay is like your body man. He's right on you. He's
my guy. He's my guy.
He's to you what's my guy is Scott Duffy. At least he's FBI. No offense, Jay. But I'm my guy.
Offense taken, Joel.
Scott Duffy was escorting me around CrimeCon, making sure that that I was safe.
I can vouch. He certainly was.
Yes, he was. So before we get to the some of the forensic details today, including that infamous taillight, one of the things that came up, over the last couple of days, is Karen Reed's, blood alcohol, Bob Motta, and one of the things that this state trooper, who's Proctor supervisor, Yuri Buchanan, says that she could be consuming 6 drinks inside CF McCarthy's. The obvious implication is she had quite a lot to drink. There's been a discussion. Did she have 9 drinks? Did she have? Well, today he put a number out there at 6 drinks. Does that do anything for you analyzing this from a legal perspective, knowing that her blood alcohol was above the limit and that it was at least these 6 drinks that he's speaking of?
Well, look, I mean, I'm going to catch a lot of hell with this, but I mean, it's been my position. I don't think that they're ever going to be able to prove intent for second-degree murder anyway. And I think what it does is it locks them into a manslaughter case. I just don't see how that they think that helps them in any way, shape, or form. Now, intoxication is no defense, obviously. However, in terms of the intent and to believe that she went through so many things that she would have had to have done in terms of going in, erasing the ring, John O'Keefe's ring camera, for that 2-hour period when she returns back to the house with the thought being that she knew that she hit him, right? That's why she did that. And that she turned it off. She positioned the vehicle so that when she was backing out, she would bump into it to mask why the damage to the taillight had happened, that she's cooking up these phone calls she's going to start making right at 5 a.m, and all of it that follows, to me, if you have her hammered with 9 drinks coming out of, like, I think they had her with 7 drinks, 6 or 7 drinks coming out of McCarthy's, and then going over to the waterfall after that and continuing to drink. I don't know how that plays for the state in terms of their second-degree murder case. To me, it hurts it. But I've seen nothing either pre-trial or during the trial. And granted, we are just getting into the Commonwealth's case against Karen Reed now. But I've seen nothing that it is going to come close to meeting that intent element that they have to have for the murder. They don't have to have it for the manslaughter, but they have to have it for the second-degree murder.
Yeah, and we talked about this, Josh, you and I, about it being overcharged. Someone mentioned this earlier, so let's just get to this. Michael Proctor is the lead investigator, the Massachusetts state trooper who's under investigation himself. And one of the lingering questions now, Josh, is does the Commonwealth call him? And if so, when, how, why, and is he going to invoke his Fifth Amendment right because he's under investigation? This is a mess, and I'm going to ask Sky the same question, but have you ever been part of or watched a trial where the lead investigator is not called by the government?
Yeah, I think it would be a huge mistake for them to not call him. And I have personal experience with that. When I was a prosecutor, I had made that mistake once. I'd had a case where I didn't put on the lead prosecutor, and I didn't even do it for all of the reasons that they may be contemplating it here in this case. I didn't do it because he just wasn't that instrumental to my case. I mean, a lead prosecutor many times is kind of the administrator. They're not the ones who are actually, retrieving and bagging all of the evidence. They may not be the ones who are even initially interviewing all of the witnesses. They're kind of playing quarterback afterwards and gathering all of the information, packaging it all together, handing it off to the prosecution. And I had a case where I just didn't feel it was necessary. And that became a problem for me as a prosecutor. in this, and I never made that mistake again, even if I had to throw him on just to kind of lay it out, how this whole scheme worked, how the whole investigation worked, just so jurors felt more comfortable with it. In this case, though, even more so, unless there is something that is so compelling and a door that Lally so wants to avoid opening up, I think it would be a huge strategic error not to call him, because, again, the defense has made him into a starring role in this entire case. And if they don't call him, then the defense wins either way, because the defense can either call him themselves and then still have their way with him. And if they, start on direct examination and that turns adverse and they have to take him on cross, they're going to have a field day with that. And if they decide to never call him too, they're just going to exploit that in closing argument and say, ladies and gentlemen, the boogeyman that never got called to the stand, you never heard from because of A, B, C, and D. And that's why this case fails. And that's why they didn't meet their burden and everything else. So I've heard a lot of rumors online about the fact that that's what they're contemplating and they're not going to call him. I think it could be a fatal strategic error for the prosecution.
And Scott, I'm going to have you jump in on that. I mean, you've obviously had your fair share of high-profile criminal defense cases. How can you not call the lead investigator? But if you do call him, is there going to be a chance here for either the Commonwealth and or the defense that he's just going to say, I take the fifth, I take the fifth, I take that, I plead the fifth?
I agree. I think they have to call him, because if they don't call him, the defense is going to stand up in closing argument and say, remember all those things I said? He didn't even get up and say he didn't do it, or, something along those lines. So I think it's as bad as, I think that the look of it is bad. I think you have to call him, especially since he's really himself been put on trial for the way he managed the investigation. So he needs to get up and say something. Now, he's probably going to get beat up over that wasn't in a report, or that wasn't said, or it wasn't written down at the time. We all ask those questions in every single case. It's why they should probably teach better report writing, and they don't. But, it's standard questions, like you're taught how to write reports, because cases go to trial years later and you didn't write it down, but all of a sudden now you're remembering. And I don't know if those always carry the day. I think it depends on what else the defense has. But if he says nothing, they get to get up and just hammer him in closing arguments. And I think that'll be really damaging. Now, if there's something so bad, that he did, like if he really did just, alter evidence or withhold evidence or destroy evidence or fabricate evidence or whatever, and he's forced to take the fifth, that's probably worse. But short of that, it's cross-examination, and you can beat these guys up all the time for the way they did it. And I don't know that it always carries the day. So
and let me jump in there too. I agree with both Sky and Josh in the sense that it will be potentially a catastrophic error if Lally doesn't call him. But I'm telling you, I watched Buchnick's testimony today, and I don't know if either of you, because you guys actually have real jobs, like Buchnick absolutely laid the foundation by asking all kinds of collective knowledge type questions. I don't think they're calling him. Like the entire day, I said it flat out on my stream. They're not calling Proctor. I'd put money on it. And it was all collective knowledge doctrine, which, if you guys don't know, that's basically cops through other cops and their reports and things that other cops have worked on can testify as to other work that cops have done through this doctrine. And Lally put it out there, and it was a little bit of a surprise to me. I did not know that Buchnick was a higher ranking cop than Proctor.
So that's what I was going to ask, Bob, because he's Proctor's supervisor. So,
right.
I mean, it's sort of a de facto, here's Proctor's boss, is what you're saying. So now we don't need to call Proctor. Is that how I understand
exactly?
it?
And he is using Buchnick to put in everything that you would have expected Proctor to put in. And he took the opportunity to use it to minimize Proctor's role. He basically said, he testified today that Proctor was basically saying, look, I'm asking this cop to do this cop to do that, that he he was pretty much hands off, and that he was just instructing the other cops as to what he wanted them to do. So like Lally's making a move to shift Proctor out of the limelight as being the lead investigator on the case. And I'm telling you, in today's testimony, Buchnick's putting everything in. Buchnick is the star witness as far as the Massachusetts State Police or state troopers go, unequivocally. Like, he's using them. I'd put money on it they're not calling Proctor, which then raises the question, does the defense call him? Which creates a very weird situation wherein they're going to have to call him, initially trying to direct him. Which is going to be bizarre. And then as soon as that happens, and then they ask permission to treat him as hostile, what happens on what should be cross, because they're calling him as their own witness. You cannot call your own witnesses in order to impeach them. Can't do it. Like, you can't call them for the purpose of impeaching them. It creates this incredibly weird situation that it's like it's this building storm. So I don't know.
Yeah, I want to dig a little more into that, but Josh Ritter, I was going to throw Motta under the bus, but he stepped in there, so now I'm going to throw you under the bus, because this is the kind of answer that'll give you some heat. From Aniello, 5:07 a.m. There was some interesting testimony today. 5:07 a.m. shows the red tail light missing. That proves Proctor never planted it. Followed here by Jimmy McNutty again, who goes on to say he thinks Lally's doing an amazing job. Your response to these two comments, this tail light, there was a lot of testimony today that they were putting pieces back together that seemed to fit, that were only found at the scene, which obviously plays to the strength and the argument of the Commonwealth. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I think it was a good day for the Commonwealth. I mean, I really do. Lally doesn't have the same kind of flair that you walk away feeling like he got a lot of punches in, but just from the evidence that was presented, it was definitely in the strong suit of the prosecution rather than the defense. And that, I think that showed on some of the cross too. It wasn't what we've seen before. It was a lot of them kind of just going through what they already testified to with a very fine tooth comb, and maybe pointing out small things about, well, wasn't a piece missing and you weren't able to match this exact piece to all of that. When the greater question here is, by the way, here's the broken taillight found at the scene. I mean, if this sounds like, it sounds like this comparison is going to get me heat, but it sounds almost like that kind of OJ defense that you go to when there's a bunch of forensic evidence. You start just nitpicking every single piece of forensic evidence and trying to call each little piece of it into question and ignoring the whole of it. And I think that's what the defense we saw from them today. And what we're left with is, okay, well, the defense has already said that she's framed. Now they're saying that he was, killed or nearly killed inside of the home and then planted outside. And then they had to somehow get some of her taillight and plant that at the scene. And where did they get the taillight from? And when you start to put together this Rube Goldberg kind of scenario of all the things that had to fall together in order for this conspiracy to play itself out, the prosecution case is starting to look a lot stronger. So yes, today was, just being as objective as I possibly can. It was a good day for the prosecution. They were getting into their forensics. This is where they're going to shine, getting into how they're actually going to, as Bob said, prove this case rather than disprove the defense case. And if they continue to do this from here on out, the question then becomes, are they going to be able to mitigate all of the damage that has been done to their case up to this time?
From D Mart here, so you heard it there. So don't come hating me. Go hate Ritter. They said it was a good day for the Commonwealth. I think the cross of Yuri Buchanan
too. Look at him. What a guy.
Yeah. By the way, this guy Yuri again is Michael Proctor's supervisor at the Massachusetts State Police. But D Mart says, I think the cross, and this is Sky Lazaro world here, will be masterful. They'll figure out how to maneuver the dilemma to counter the hocus pocus of trying to keep Proctor out. I feel like it will be masterful. I mean, Sky, take us inside baseball for a minute. You know this better than anyone. This is like a chess game in real time. So now
Mhm.
Lally's got this Yuri guy on the stand. He's putting together figuratively and literally some of the pieces that the Commonwealth needs. And now Alan Jackson or Yannetti are going to try to shred him. How are you like counterpointing in real time? Like, what is the defense doing right now as they hear this testimony to then go back and eviscerate that testimony to their benefit?
Yeah, I think some of this is going to come, where some of this testimony has come in that it's other people who did it. So he's relying on, reports that other officers made. He's not going to be able to answer hard questions, right? So when they start getting down into, if these guys didn't write really good reports, and in cross-examination, when they start asking the really hard questions, like, what did you do next? Like, what did you, like, and really getting into, how did you pick this up? And what did it look like? Or whatever those questions are, he's not going to be able to answer those, right? So then he just becomes a figurehead who, and just from a defense perspective, he's protecting his own, right? We're not putting Proctor on. I'm his boss, so I'm telling you that everybody did it right, so it's good. And that can play both ways, but I think the defense team in this case is talented enough to probably make it really uncomfortable and really hard on him. And if he can't answer those questions, even the question of, you didn't put that in your report, why isn't it there? He can't answer that. All he can say is, that's what was there, right?
Well, Sky, let me be Nancy Grace for a minute and interrupt you and ask you this question. What is really going on here, Sky Lazar?
He's just kidding, Nancy.
What is really going on? No, seriously, Sky, look, no matter which way you slice this, and it took me a while to kind of even come around to this conclusion. There's something that's being hidden here by these police officers, by Brian Albert and Brian Higgins. There's too many butt dials, 2 among Higgins and Albert, and then 6 with Jen McCabe. And then Higgins goes and tears up his SIM card on a military base. What do you think? I'm not expecting, you to have some illustrative, detailed map of what happened, but
Right.
Is it possible that Karen Reed, and I'm saying this, is it possible she did strike and maybe kill John O'Keefe, and these police are not good cops and they're trying to hide something nefarious is going on here? I think
Something happened. I agree. Something happened that nobody wants to talk about and everybody's trying to cover up. Now, whether it's that the defense theory is right, or she was drunk and accidentally hit him, or whatever it is, or he had something else going on, nobody knows, and probably will never know the answer to those questions. It's going to be the great mystery forever in this case. But I think juries or the general public, when they look at law enforcement, they want to believe that law enforcement are honest, they're honorable, they do their job right, they're not out to cover anything up for their friends, girlfriends, or anybody else. And so when you have a case like this where it just smells bad, like it's just like there's just something there, whether the defense is right or not, there's something there and people aren't being forthcoming. I think it's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of jurors in the common people, because they want to believe I can trust a police officer. They do their job right. Like, they're out for the truth. Everybody's out for the truth. Like, they're just going to do their job. And when that doesn't seem to be happening because of all this other weird stuff that's going on, that there is really no good explanation on, other than they sound like my clients, when they're trying to explain it, which is not a good place to be when you're law enforcement. It casts doubt, and what you need is reasonable doubt. That's the reality, is if they can't even get their stories right and believable, and it looks like they're hiding things, it leaves jurors, and I think a lot of people asking, well, like, what happened? And if you're asking the question, what happened, then it's a little bit harder to convict someone.
Yeah, all amazing points. Ritter, you were prosecutor of the year. Mustang driver says we're kind of bouncing around here, but we'll get back, I promise, to the testimony from today. Mustang driver Adam Lally, the ADA is so boring, followed by this. Adam Lally puts everyone to sleep as he drones on in monotone. But then I've heard from other people who, again, watch trials carefully and think he's doing an amazing job of just going piece by piece. How do you square it? And is it important? I mean, someone, who was it yesterday? I had Catherine Loftus, who's a former ADA, and she said he's so monotone. There's just zero inflection that it's almost impossible to remember what he's saying, because it's like, watching a flatlined EKG. You don't know. There's no emphasis on specific words. How do you square all this? Is he going to get crushed because of the boring nature of how he delivers his material, or is he laying it out okay?
Well, from a just purely entertainment perspective, he's getting blown out of the water. I mean, especially in juxtaposition to the two other attorneys in the courtroom with
objection.
They're just running circles around him as far as just presentation. But if we're just reading the transcript of all of this and not being able to see the antics in court, he's very thorough and he's very deliberate, and he's getting through all of his evidence, and he's marking everything thoroughly and getting, making sure he's checking every single box as far as what he needs to do as a prosecutor. But, everybody on this panel knows part of being a trial attorney is an element of theater. And if you are making a point with a witness, and that is not clear to everyone who hasn't been paying attention, that this is an important point that they should be paying attention to, and please be taking notes while this is happening, it's going to get missed by jurors. And if the folks watching this right now are saying he puts me to sleep, then I imagine he's putting some of the jurors to sleep too. And that's a problem if he's making, as he was today, I think some very solid, valid points for the prosecution. But if they're just glazed over and in a food coma from lunch and not really paying attention to everything that's happening, and they're missing it, and they're not taking a note, they're not going to bring that back into the deliberation room after this trial. So he's doing a good job on paper, but he is getting outshined, and it may present problems for him when presenting this case. Last thing I'll say on this is it's not even the lack of enthusiasm as much as it seems to be the lack of caring about it. He doesn't, I don't get the idea that he really cares how this turns out. I fully feel that the defense is invested in this from an emotional standpoint. He just seems like, boy, I get my paycheck whether I'm here or not. And it's like, after this case is over, I've got 5 other on my desk I've got to handle. And I just don't get the idea from the way he's been handling himself. And I don't want to attack him personally. He may care about this very much, but it does not seem to be coming through in the way he's handling himself in court.
Those harsh words, but I hear what you're saying. And I think a lot of people are wondering that, but sometimes it's hard to I don't know the guy personally. So sometimes it's hard to read the demeanor. And sometimes, I think there's going to be jurors that care about the sort of the histrionics and the dramatics flair, and others, again, pointing to someone like Jimmy McNutty, no pun intended, he just cares about the nuts and bolts of what's being presented. But Adele Conti here, to you, Bob Motta, I see a big part of her tail light on her car at 507. It's even lighted, is missing at the end of police work, though. It was seen on the video clearly to me. Still part was missing. And then I've been reading tweets the last few nights. This one comes, random tweets that I'm looking at. This one comes from Misty, Bob. It says, everyone is so interested in the tail light, yet there's not a single photograph, all caps of single, of the tail light. No one thought to take a picture that night. No one, but it was such a big, huge deal, and no one busted out a phone. Come on. I mean, we've heard about, obviously, the shoddy investigation, but yeah, everyone, I'll be honest, this tail light has me spun around. I have no idea what's going on at this point with this tail light. What do you make of it? How do you understand it?
it's tough to make heads or tails of it. And the fact is that Misty made a good point. I mean, no one took a clear picture of the damn thing. It's like we're having to, like read through the tea leaves, watching these videos at various times and trying to figure out whether or not there's pieces of it missing. I mean, it's not a good look for an investigation where the thrust of your case is that a vehicle struck someone, and the only damage that really of any consequence on that vehicle is the taillight, and they don't have a clear picture of it at a time that matters. You know what I'm saying? It's like it just doesn't exist. Like when they pull up to John O'Keefe's, when the car's parked there early morning, when I can't remember who it was, one of the first three cops that testified, he was there. Like even if it's your phone, take out the things that go, oh, look, the taillight's crying. I mean, no one gets a clear picture of it. So now we're left with this, which is a situation where everyone's bickering about when the thing was broken. I mean, obviously at this point, we know when it was broken. If you're to believe the defense, it was cracked and somehow it became shattered at some point in time. When, we don't know. But if you're gonna hear the state side of it, it was destroyed upon impact with John O'Keefe. I mean, we're going to have to wait until the ME comes in, because my biggest problem with this case is matching up the injuries with being struck with a 6,000-pound SUV. 24 miles an hour, Joel, Sky, Josh, if that's us, we're going to have some bruising. We're going to have contusions. We're going to have something on our torso, our thighs, wherever it strikes the body. This concept that it was his head was down and that's what caused the egg on the eye. I'm not buying it. If his head's down, it's breaking his neck. I mean, if he's getting struck. So like, I'm going to have to piece together what happened with the taillight in comparison to what they're able to present through their medical examiner. And it was interesting, again, through Buchnick today, as he's testifying the injuries, Jackson was shutting him down through objections, but he was trying to get in what he thought the cause of the injuries were, and the Jackson would object, Bev would sustain it. So he wasn't getting it in, but he was certainly trying, and Lally was trying to get him to get it in, so it was, the whole taillight thing, man, is super annoying because of the fact, and I don't care what side of this you're on. If you're being honest and you're looking at this police investigation and you're saying that it's anything other than lackluster and maybe even terrible, you're not being honest with yourself. Because the amount of abuse that these people have taken in terms of the Alberts and the McCabe's, and I have no idea as I sit here right now whether they're involved or they're not. I agree with everybody that there's something that's being hidden. I don't know what it could be. I mean, are people sleeping with each other's wives? It could be a million things that people don't want to see on your phones. I mean, think of it like, I don't want anybody going through my phone. You know what I'm saying? Like no, aside from my wife. My wife's the only one who's got clearance to go through my phone. But like strangers, and if you're a cop, who knows what they're doing? So I don't know any of that. But had they done a proper investigation, had they gone and tried to get a warrant and said, look, here's our PC. We've got a guy who was destined for that house. Somehow he didn't make it in. I don't care that the witnesses are saying he didn't come in. Since when do cops believe witnesses that are potential suspects? Ever? No, they don't. I think that the fact that there's a body on the front lawn for a house that person was destined to would probably be enough for a judge to sign off and say, go take a peek. We're looking for evidence that something happened in that house. The fact of the matter is none of that happened, which has left us right where we are right now. And, like aside from the solo cups and the leaf blowers and just all the awful shit that's gone on in this investigation, just the entire scope of it alone is brutal. And it's made this case almost impossible for the state to prove, in my estimation. I mean, to me, it just reeks with reasonable doubt. We've got 3 defense attorneys on here. We're always going to attack a lackluster or awful investigation. It's a primary tool of ours in terms of attacking the state's case. And like, we're going to go after their cops and we're going to go after their investigation. So, and then when it supports it by the fact that it actually was a terrible investigation, because there's no such thing as a perfect investigation. There's human beings where we all make mistakes. There is no such thing as a perfect investigation. You'll never see one happen. There's always going to be things that you could pick on. But when you could pick on everything, it's a problem. So as far as the taillight,
Solo cups.
Red Solo, yeah. Twirly's mom here. So looking forward to medical examiner testimony. I've been curious about the totality of injuries. One question that arises is, did he get bumped and knocked down? Severe head injury, cause of death, she's wondering. This is an interesting comment. Courtney with a K. I came into this thinking Karen was guilty. I've been watching the trial, but I have no idea what happened. I would vote not guilty. There you go. There's the power of a defense attorney. A few people said that my Nancy Grace impersonation is the worst thing they've ever heard, which is why I'll probably do it again. Here's Cy Barbie. Why I'll probably do it again before this show is over. This is the taillight that's in question. And then we've got a photo here of the car from the old, this is video actually, of them bringing the car, the SUV, into the Sally Port, I believe, on this snowy night. And now there's all this talk about the video being altered. And I'm going to be completely transparent. I am following this case really closely, but I have trouble following all the nuances, all the different types of chaos and ineptness, if I could use that word, associated with the investigation. One thing that was brought up in court today, again, Sky Lazaro, the evidence was delivered. Some of the evidence, I think they're talking about the taillight here, was delivered to the crime lab by Michael Proctor, the lead investigator, on March 14th, 2022. This happened, remember, January 29th. So it's delivered March 14th. David Yannetti, the defense attorney, asking about the gap between January 29th, when O'Keefe died, and March 14th, when the evidence was delivered. And he says, you do not know. He's speaking to Valier, the forensic scientist with the Mass State Police. And he says to her, you do not know what Michael Proctor did or didn't do with the orange T-shirt and gray long sleeve T-shirt, Yannetti asked. Again, raising doubt. Have you heard? I mean, I'm not that familiar. Is this an incredibly long period of time for the lead investigator to deliver this to the crime lab?
I think it depends on where it was in the interim. You know, I've had cases that didn't go very well for the state because things ended up in officers' desks or the trunks of their cars. You know, when you're talking about evidence being preserved in a potential homicide, you want to like bag it, tag it, and put it exactly where it needs to be, even if you don't take it to the crime lab right away, even if it doesn't get submitted for testing right away, it needs to be cataloged and inventoried somewhere. If this stuff is just who knows where for 3 months, you know, I think that's one, it's a huge problem, and that's probably becomes like a Brady Giglio issue for Proctor going forward in other trials, because I would imagine that it's going to come up again about his mishandling of evidence if that is in fact what happened. But somebody better have an answer for this. I think that this taillight thing, I agree. I think the ME report and testimony is going to be really telling. I've done enough auto homicide cases that, you know, were accidents or whatever, that, you know, there's significant bruising in different places. It's not going to be, you know, 1 point of trauma when you get hit by a car. Like, it just, I don't think that that's possible. So you're going to see other stuff. And I think somebody along the way, whether they put Proctor on or don't put Proctor on, is going to have to explain where this evidence was, because this taillight thing is weird. I think it's a distraction probably on both sides. But if you don't have an answer for that either, it's just one more thing that the state can't answer. And when you start adding up all these things that they can't answer, you know, that creates a problem. And you know, then I think jurors can, I've seen juries, you know, kind of punish the state for cops not doing their job, if nothing else.
Can I jump on to
Yeah,
Guy's
John,
point there
please.
really quick? That I love what you were saying about, you know, it really depends on what was done with it, because there could have just been a backlog and he was holding on to it till he got it to the lab or whatever else. It could be any number of very innocent things, but you see the kind of brilliance between the way that Yannetti even asked that question in, you don't know what Trooper Proctor did with it in the meantime. The idea being he did something and you have no idea what that man was up to. And that's just this kind of narrative they continue to push, that this, like I said, this man's the boogeyman. And when if he had that for 3 months, who knows what he was up to with that evidence before he handed it over to you. It's just, I think that if the jurors are buying this, they're continuing to plant these seeds that are going to be big problems for the prosecution.
By the way, Courtney H is asking, what is the press reporting on the jurors? We had a reporter on last week, and she's saying that these jurors are taking this extremely seriously. When there's been some laughter in the court, they are stoic. They are just watching and I believe taking notes and listening intently. So that's good news. Bob Motta from New Jersey, Kathy, no better state. No offense to Illinois, California, or Utah. Well, Utah might be better. It's a lot prettier. What about I think she's talking about the CO. I was going to say the COE. I think this SUV's black box here. Doesn't the SUV, Bob Motta, has a backup camera. Cars are basically computers on wheels now. What about that? I didn't think of that. Can't they go into? I know you're not a forensic expert with automobiles, but you are a criminal defense attorney. Can't they figure stuff out from the car?
I am dying to know. You know, I've had this conversation so many times that, look, this is a high-end Lexus SUV. So the black box, I mean, if you look at what they were able to derive from Murdoch's vehicle, and that was substantially older in terms of black box information. I mean, like in my Audi, if I'm backing up and I'm within 3 feet of something, it so violently brakes because of the system that I think that I've hit something, you know. And in terms of whether or not contact was made, I've seen varying information out there, and I ignore all the noise on both sides. All I care about is the evidence that's presented at trial. So I'm anticipating, because I find it hard to believe that the black box in a Lexus is not going to be triggered until the vehicle's going over 25 miles an hour, which I've seen people saying out there. That seems absurd to me. The entire point of having the black box is probably for the soft tissue lobby in terms of civil cases. Like, oh, you know what, can you make a box that tells us, like, if somebody, you know, and it's like, and those are all 7 to 10 miles an hour. So you're going to tell me that we've got like a vehicle that's going, at least in the state's estimation, 24 miles an hour. How convenient that it was 1 mile short of 25, where the black box would give us information. You know, it's like, I'm dying to see that. I'm dying to see what, if anything, exists with that black box. That's kind of the key to the whole case, isn't it? Doesn't that make this case super easy?
Yeah, that's 100%. Go ahead, Sky.
I was going to say, if you're the state and that's in fact true, that because a lot of these vehicles anymore, like, they record impact and they'll tell you exactly like where the impact on the vehicle was, you know, in certain instances, especially where you're talking about high-end vehicles. Like, I think I have a case right now with an auto homicide with an Audi, and the damn car was like, this is where she hit him and this is how fast she was going. Like, so
the car, I'm sorry, Sky, the car gives out all the details.
Yes. The car had the information of the impact and the rate of speed at the time of impact. So if it's true that it wasn't triggered or it didn't work or whatever it is, like, if I'm the state, I'm calling an expert or somebody from Lexus or somebody to explain to the jury, this is why we don't have it. Because what they need to do is, like, kind of put a stop to what the defense is doing here, which is, you know, you don't know, so we don't know, so you can't convict her. Like, they need to do something if that is in fact the case, so that just kind of shuts that down. Like, I'm sorry, but we don't know, but this is why we don't know, and it's not because we're not telling you.
Right.
By the way, I haven't gotten a single piece of like testimony and I wrote it all down, spent all this time, but we'll get to it, I hope. A. Heineman here, back to Ritter. Josh, you obviously been on both sides of the aisle as a prosecutor and defense attorney. Why are they waiting so long for the medical examiner? A. Heineman here says, I have absolutely no idea still how John O'Keefe died. What's the strategy here?
Yeah, along with the black box, the medical examiner is probably the other thing I'm waiting to hear from. And I think they plan to call that right at the end of their case. And if that's a kind of strategic move, I applaud it, because I think that could be the strongest part of their case, because I cannot imagine them even filing this if they do not have a medical examiner who can explain those injuries and explain why. What's funny about this case is we know so much about the defense theories and what they plan to prove from what they've said in court before and what we're seeing on the internet, but we know very little about what the prosecution case is as far as the medical examiner or what the black box is going to prove, if there is even a black box. And I cannot imagine they would even file this case if they do not have a medical examiner who is going to say those injuries were caused by a vehicle or consistent with having been caused by a vehicle. The injuries on his arm are inconsistent with any kind of animal attack. All of these questions that the defense has been bringing up, I cannot imagine them proceeding on this case if they don't have a definitive answer to all of that that's going to be presented through the medical examiner. We've heard a lot about his injuries, the black eyes that he had, everything about this. You're sitting here, all of us going, well, how in the world are they going to prove, like the question was, how he died, and that he died from a vehicle impacting him? And the medical examiner better be able to say that. If we get to the medical examiner and that falls short, or that is flat as far as not being able to answer those questions, game over as far as I'm concerned. Because I think he's waiting for the very end, put that medical examiner on, and that is what the jurors are left with in their minds when they go into the defense case and then to deliberate.
And it is getting long now. Lest you think we are not a global show, all you have to do is read this from Gil Kennedy. The world is watching this debacle from Magnetic Island, Australia, where it is the future. It is the next day there. Frankie Figs, she's a big friend of the show, and much more. What is the deal with every cross question beginning? You would agree. Sky Lazaro, I guess criminal defense attorneys get into speech habits. People yell at me for saying all the time, which I do, and they yell at me for my Nancy Grace impersonation, which I will do again. But this stuff to me is interesting because it's so small, and you think it's like this minutia, but the way a person is perceived could influence the way a juror decides this case. Is it not? Is this like a verbal tick that they're constantly starting with, you would agree, or is this some sort of thing that you are taught in law school?
I think it can be both. And I think when you say things like that over and over and over again, some people may ignore it and may not even realize that you say it. And it might annoy the absolute hell out of someone else where they just want you to stop talking. But you hear this a lot from defense attorneys. You would agree, or they ask a question, and, isn't it true that, like, whatever it is. I think the idea, and there's probably more artful ways to ask these questions, but we kind of fall into these patterns of asking it, is you want to keep your cross-examination questions really narrow to yes or no. The last thing you want to do on cross, if you have a point to make, is allow the witness to be able to explain it away and say, yes, but, and you say, no, I asked you a yes or no question. And the judge said, no, you didn't. He can answer. Right. So I think defense attorneys, or a lot of defense attorneys, we fall into this habit of these kind of starters or the way we end the question to keep it a yes or no question so that we're not allowing a defense or a witness to explain it, over an objection, or just, keep talking. We can ask them to strike the response or whatever. But I think that's why we see a lot of those.
Sky, why weren't you at Crime Con? Is it because you're a real attorney?
Yes, Guy. Why weren't
I
you at
didn't even
Crime
know
Con?
about it.
We're
What is
inviting
this?
you to. You're coming to. It's in Denver, 2025,
All
September,
right.
Denver.
I am not one
Yeah,
of
we're
the
going to see to
cool
it that you're there.
We're
Yeah.
gonna. Bob, Josh, and I are inviting you formally.
Thank you.
That's
Please
yes.
remind me so I put it on my calendar.
We've got a
We
year,
will.
but we'll remind you. We'll remind you every month.
I would love to come. I didn't even know it was a thing. So
They'll love to have you as a speaker.
She's
so we'll
she's
talk.
going to be trying to get some guy out of the Congo at that
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
well,
I know.
if he's not out of the Congo by then, there's
Yeah, I'm somewhere in
Problem.
South Africa.
So,
I won't be a Crime Con because I'll be live in the Congo covering that case.
well,
Barbara
that case,
here.
we'll just all go. Okay.
Yeah, we'll all go to the Congo.
I mean, I'm down.
Yeah. I wasn't far, by the way. Believe little Joel COE honeymoon story. We went to Tanzania and Rwanda. Rwanda's next door to the Congo. I went to see gorillas in the wild. Best trip of my life. You got to go to Africa and see the animals in the wild. Barbara here. I'm a regular and a possible juror. I'm a regular person, I think she's saying, and a possible juror one day. I'm not buying the conspiracy cult theory, Bob Motta. And then I pulled another tweet. I have to say this. She's a friend of Bob and myself. It is Julie Grant from Court TV, one of the sweetest people you will ever meet. But those who believe Karen Reed is innocent do not like Julie Grant. And it's for this tweet, among other things that she tweets out. But she wrote legal analysis, Bob, on a tweet today. If Officer O'Keefe was really killed in a fight with 3 people, they wouldn't have any need to connect his death to Karen Reed. They would simply claim the beating was in self-defense and vouch for each other. Justice for John O'Keefe. Are you buying that? Is this conspiracy? And this is where I'm going to get the hate mail. Is it a little bit of a bridge too far? I mean, look, I'm going to say this again. Something is going on with the Higgins and the Alberts. I mean, they are hiding something, but maybe it's not the fact that they killed this guy. Maybe, who knows? It could be, like Bob said, a million things. The wives they could be cheating with the wife. Who knows what's going on?
Swingers. Who knows? I mean, who knows what's going on in Canton, man? It's a little town.
You have no idea, but it is clear that something is being hidden. But do you agree with this idea that if they did really kill him, they'd just be vouching and saying, hey, it was self-defense. Hey, we did it. I don't know if it's as simple as that.
Yeah, and I love Julie. You know, I'm on with her all the time. She's amazing, the sweetest woman you could ever imagine. But she's dug in. I mean, my thing is, I refuse to be dug in at this point, and I'm willing to listen to any theory. I mean, I've been doing this job long enough to know that the truth is stranger than fiction all the time. Anything's possible. If you're asking me, do I refuse to think that there's a concept or a world in which, John O'Keefe read the text messages coming from Higgins as late as the night of, where he's like, well, what, or whatever the hell he says. He says, I'm going in to hash it out with dude, and something goes down in there. I'm willing to entertain that. In terms of like stretching it out to a gigantic conspiracy, I'm not necessarily there at all. I don't think that it has to be that. I think it could be contained. I think that you're talking about a small crew, that was in that house. My problem in terms of that conspiracy theory has always been like the Sarah Levinsons, the kids of the 2 girls that were there for Chris Albert Jr.'s party or to celebrate his birthday. Like, it becomes a little tougher for me to buy into, like, they've now been able to encapsulate these 2 other people that are not a part of the inner circle into, we're keeping it quiet, we're shutting it down, whatever happened in here. But my point being is, I have to see all the evidence, because I'm going to tell you one thing. John O'Keefe is deceased and something happened to him. Mm-hmm. And if the ME cannot, as Josh so aptly put, wrap this state's case up as the last witness that they put on, proving to me that those injuries were caused by an SUV, well, then what the hell am I left with? I'm left with whatever the defense is posited in terms of a potential theory, or my theory, which is that he slipped on the like either the sidewalk, the stairs, or the driveway, cracked the back of his skull, made his way up to his knees, like got to his feet, and then falls and collapses where they find him, and some wild animal with this huge nature reserve of like steps away, a bobcat or an owl. I don't know. Like I want to know if these wounds are like potentially posthumous, if they're after death. I mean, like at this point, I don't know enough about the facts of the case to make anything impossible. You know, that's where I'm at. Like I would just suggest everybody take a breath, let all the evidence come in, and let's see where it lays. And then let's argue about it, because I agree with Sky. I happen to think that this is a case that we're never going to know what actually happened.
Yeah. And look at Brandy Churchwell, by the way, has done great work on this. She's going to be on our show, I hope, next week. 13th Juror podcast. That's why I say this is the only case where everyone seems guilty of something, but nobody seems guilty of everything. Such a weird case. And as much as I read up and try to get information, there's a question here about the holes in the sweatshirt. Where did they come from? Who the hell knows? Maybe what Bob just said is a possibility. Maybe he slipped and fell and someone was clawing at him. I've heard many people say those are not dog marks, by the way. I've heard people say, yes, they haven't found dog DNA. One of the people who was on the stand, Josh, this is a little bit of the testimony I want to get to, and then we'll get final thoughts in a little bit. Christina Hanley, she's the forensic scientist and supervisor with the Massachusetts State Police Trace Unit. She was on the stand today. She analyzed the broken cocktail glass, and she told the jury that she found that the piece found on Karen Reed's bumper does in fact match glass collected at the scene. And then Josh Ritter, this is where Alan Jackson is kind of brilliant, and maybe you hate him a little bit if you're anti-Alan Jackson in any way, because he goes, Josh, and he this is a glass, and on cross-examinations he says, he asked about 3 other items of the glass, and he goes, they were not a match with the cup. And now it's subliminal, but he's calling the glass a cup here, which I thought was really interesting. And he says, as you sit here, he's talking to the expert, none of the items on the bumper were deemed to match the cup. So again, he's raising reasonable doubt. Sort of a genius move to call a glass a cup, because now you're basically redefining what this is to the jurors. I'm curious how he got away with using the word cup, but he did. But he's contending that it's not a match, when she in essence is saying that it is. How does a jury figure that out? 'Cause I can't figure that out.
I was trying to pay attention really closely as he was walking through that, because that, I think, is the same time when he was trying to put all of the categories into different columns, and he was trying to lay out. And again, like you said, he's taking the prosecution evidence and readapting it into his own kind of way of explaining it. And he was talking about how, each of the things you analyze, let's put them into different columns and what was matched against what. And I was paying really, really close attention to it, because having known him and just seeing him through this trial too, I know that he's building up. He loves to build up for 15, 20 minutes to one really excellent point. And I saw that he got to that. And it did seem to be that the killer point being that this didn't match to what was on the bumper. And isn't that in fact true? And I was a little confused. I imagine that some of the jurors at least might have been a little bit confused, but you can guarantee this, that if that point wasn't made clear through that cross-examination, he at least got that testimony out on the record, and he will make it abundantly clear in closing argument if in fact that was the point being made, because that's a crucial piece of forensics, that if a piece of that glass or cup, whatever you want to call it, that he was holding was then also found on her bumper, then we've got yet another thing that the defense, this conspiracy and fraud frame up would have to do to connect all the dots here. And I think there are folks who at this point may just feel that that's exactly what happened. And they were sprinkling evidence all over the place and putting some on the bumper and taking some of the bumper and putting it on the crime scene and everything else. But if you're trying to be as objective as you can and let the evidence lead you in this case, that is not a small point. Whether glass that he was holding that was found at the crime scene where they are alleging he was hit and that glass shattered, if that was also found on her bumper, there's just another connection there that that leads you to the only logical conclusion that she caused him to be hit with her car and he left some of the glass on her bumper. But again, if it wasn't made clear, and I think it was a little hard to follow, he will make it clear.
Yeah, and by the way, yesterday we were talking about how a hair and a piece of glass could stay on a bumper for a 100-mile-hour ride. Sky, speaking about what we were just talking about with Josh, he finally gets this witness who's on the stand, this forensics expert, to say that she confirms that the only thing the glass on the bumper was consistent with is glass that was submitted by Trooper Proctor. So he gets her to go on this whole thing and finally come back and does admit, well, yes, this was. So it's not even like where we began, but it ends with, well, Trooper Proctor was behind supplying this evidence that she examined. So again, it's kind of a lot of misdirection. Nikki Cuds, a friend of mine, met her up in New York at the book tour. She wants to know from you, Sky, when do jurors lose focus? Is that already happening?
It's hard, especially it depends on the case. You do your best. And my experience in talking to a lot of juries over the years is I am always impressed by how close of attention they actually pay to things, where I'm not sure if they're actually listening or not. But sometimes you get these cases where you have to get a bunch of evidence in and it is boring as hell. And there's nothing you can do to make it interesting. And so you hope they don't. And I think the best thing you can do is, you either need to be watching the jury if you're trying the case alone, or have someone there with you who's watching them, because you can tell when people kind of start, staring at the wall or their shoes or sleeping or whatever. And, I've always I just ask for a break. I'm just, Judge, I need 5 minutes, and let people like get up and walk around so that, they can come back. You don't always, have those opportunities, but I think where you see that and you can utilize them, you need to, and I think voice, we talked a little bit about the prosecutor and how he's a little monotone. And I think, and hey, no offense to any prosecutors on here, I love prosecutors, but I think it's an occupational hazard for career prosecutors to kind of fall into this check the box kind of mentality in their case. And it is not usually very exciting. And so, that is the defense attorney, maybe you want them to sleep through half of the state's case. I don't know, it depends what you're doing, but it's, I think, hard sometimes to gauge that and navigate it.
Yeah. From Derek Kaplan, why would you want him dead? There's no motive. It was an accident. Could have been a heat of passion crime. They could, all those drinks, tempers could have flared. Things turn on a dime. You can ask any law enforcement officer that question, and they can tell you that they've seen things go from good to bad very, very quickly. Bob Motta, another thing we hear about today, as if we haven't heard enough, was a trace of vomit. This is Yuri, the Mass State supervisor, who troopers on the stand. He tells Assistant District Attorney Adam Lally that John O'Keefe's clothes, Creighton Waters wasn't boring, and he played guitar from the Murdoch trial. John O'Keefe's clothes were positioned on the floor of the hospital. Boxer, shirt, belt, Lucky jeans, sweatshirt, and Nike sneaker. And says that he recognized trace of vomit on the clothing. By the way, he goes on to say that he doesn't even have access to the evidence room, just going to show how secure it apparently is. What do you make of this traces of vomit on the clothing? What does that add up to?
In my world, concussion. Like vomiting, it typically is hand in hand with a pretty heavy duty concussion. It wouldn't surprise me. Again, I'm not going to pound people over the head with my theory of the slip and fall, but I've seen people lose both feet from underneath them and that wound on the back of his head looks exactly as if somebody slipped and fell and smashed their head on the pavement, which would give you the raccoon eyes. I don't know what to make of it. You know what I'm saying? It's because we just like, let me put it this way. I'm going to wait until the ME gives me what they're saying. And look, we're getting medical examiners on both sides of this.
Bob,
So
how soon do you think we could get the ME? I mean, Josh said possibly the last witness here, but I mean, are we talking another couple of weeks? Like, what are we talking about here?
Well, I think the bulk of this case, if we're to believe Jackson saying he's got only 4 or 5 days in terms of getting his case in chief in, yeah, man. I mean, we're talking what, 2.5 weeks left of Lally's witnesses, you know, and I know when we looked at it, you know, and they don't have to call every witness on a witness list, but there were still 50 witnesses, I think, that were still on his list. So like we haven't gotten into all the nitty gritty. And I think, you know, with Josh and I not being privy to what the ME's full report says, we don't know if it's a home run or not. If it's a home run in his estimation, then he ends with it. You know, this is going to be my proof. This is my strongest proof. I can give you, like, unfortunately, I cannot recreate what happened here with an accident reconstructionist. The black box hasn't given us the idea of what happened here. So I'm going to put on this medical examiner who was the person who had the best ability to assess what the damage was and what caused it, because they had physical hands on John O'Keefe's body. And that's the way you end it. If it's not that witness, then I don't know. Then he's going to plug them in somewhere. But, you know, like, to me, if it's an incredibly powerful witness that Lally feels is like, this is my case right here, you know, and I think that we all agree. To me, there's not anything that's going to be more important to me in getting me over the hump in terms of believing that he was struck by an SUV than that medical examiner's testimony. It's going to be everything to me. You know, I mean, it's really going to be able to put me in a place where, like, all right, you know, because, like, I could certainly see a situation where she's hammered and she runs into him. Like, again, I am not in the camp of, like, second-degree murder. I don't ever think that they're going to be able to prove that intent, just ever. Like, it's a really hard thing to do in a case like this where it's all circumstantial and there's huge gaping holes in the investigation. So I think that Lally needs to get really comfortable in that manslaughter chair, because I think if he's getting anything, that's going to be the best that he can get. So it's hard to know, man. It really is.
Yeah. Mandy Joe says, why don't they call him officer? It's infuriating. That's another thing. People who are pro law enforcement are going to have a hard time hearing someone not refer to him as police officer John O'Keefe. Little things like that, I think, could potentially sway a jury, even though it's supposed to be the facts of the case. By the way, Josh Ritter, a lot of people have asked for your take on Judge Beverly Cannoni. A lot of people think she's partial to the Commonwealth. Are you seeing that at all?
Yeah, I think she might. I think there might be a little bit of that coming through. I will say she runs an extremely tight ship, more than I'm used to in my jurisdiction. The you know, the speaking objections thing, you know, I've seen that before, where judges usually are against any kind of speaking objection where you get up there and kind of make your little argument to the jurors. But the idea that she won't even let them give the reason for the objection is pretty abnormal to me. I don't know if that's a local rule or a courtroom rule for her, or a rule she just made up for this case itself. But I think she's demonstrated certainly that she, you know, this is going to be run exactly as she sees it. But then, you know, I saw her frustrations with Lally come through a couple of times. She certainly had a big issue with his volume control this week. He didn't seem to ever be speaking loud enough for her liking.
Constant threats of turning the AC off.
Exactly. I don't know what that torture she intends to put on everyone if he doesn't speak up. But yeah, I don't think that it's to the point where you can say that she's trying to hand this to the prosecution. But even in the in limine motions before trial, it did not seem like she's entirely on board with the defense theory, and she's got them on a very short leash as far as what she's going to let them get away with.
Tirdad Derek Shawnee would perhaps the best way to sum this up. There's one word for this case: fiasco. Pistol Pete, who hates me on most nights because he's a very pro Karen Reed. Haven't even read the comment. You can be pro law enforcement and still be against bad cops. That's true. Very true. That's like me saying I love wildcats, so therefore they won't absolutely maul you in a fight. Good analogy, I think. Maybe. NJ Kathy, her blood alcohol would have to be 0.35 if she drank what they said. There's no way she drank that. She would not have been standing. She's a tiny woman. I don't know enough about blood alcohol levels to say yes or no to that. What I do know, Sky, and we'll finish with this and then get final thoughts. Yuri Buchanan, who's this Massachusetts State Police supervisor, he was asked about his interview with Karen Reed. And he says that Karen Reed told him that she got into a fight. This is a direct quote here. She got into a fight with Mr. O'Keefe over what the niece and nephew had for breakfast. And Mr. O'Keefe did not get into a fight or physical altercation to sustain those injuries. She goes on to say, I don't know what happened last night, which is pretty honest. But she was saying things that sound, like she's basically at a loss as to what happened, but also implying that she was incredibly drunk. I guess my question, I have two questions here. With investigators, where does it become hearsay as opposed to what they were actually saying? That's question number one.
Well, she's the defendant, so any of her statements are coming in against her. So if any statement she makes to law enforcement are admissible, and it's not hearsay. So, I know there was some other stuff where one of them testified that she said she hit him, but they didn't put it in their report and some different things. But anything that she said to law enforcement is going to come in.
And then, so there's another important aspect here. So this trooper says that Karen Reed told him. So Karen Reed now telling the state trooper, John O'Keefe did not go into 34 Fairview, and she made herself a 3-point turn when she left. There's been all this discussion. Was he in the house? Was he not in the house? And now we're hearing him say that she said he never went in there. How does that play with the jurors? Is that definitive enough for them, or is this just one person saying something? And how do we know he didn't go back in at a later time?
I think we don't know. I mean, I think the whole case is a whole bunch of we don't know. It's like, she said she was drunk and doesn't remember a lot of things. I mean, maybe she hit him and that's why I didn't go in. I don't, maybe he slipped and fell and that's why I didn't go in. I mean, I don't, and if she left, I mean, there's, like you said, there's nothing to say what happened after that fact. I don't know that carries a lot of weight, in my opinion, by itself, either way.
What's amazing is that everyone, and I'm not trying to call out this person if I can find it, but it's just exactly the opposite of what Sky said. If I can, basically someone just said he got punched in the face in the basement and that's why he threw up. But we just don't know. And unless you were there in that basement at that time, you just don't know. But what we do know, Motta looks like he froze up. Oh no, he's just falling asleep. Good.
No,
we're wrapping up now.
I was reading all the hate tweets to us, Joel. I like to keep on.
Yes, I'll do that
Don't
later.
you guys not read the comments? I never read the comments.
Again, case in point of why Sky is much smarter than us. I got off last night on, as soon as the show was done and I'm sitting there reading, the first comment was, number one, I'm trying to sell my book. Number two, who would ever exploit their mother? And I'm like, my mother is a piece of history, you moron. And I started fighting with them. And I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I fighting with this person? Anyway, what we do know, Josh Ritter, he was the 2015 Outstanding Prosecutor of the Year. Soon he will be Criminal Defense Attorney of the Year. And he will also be Podcaster of the Year. He hosts not one, but two true crime podcasts, True Crime Daily, The Sidebar, and his new one. Please check it out, Courtroom Confidential. Courtroom Confidential. Josh Ritter, your final thoughts.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys. This was a fantastic panel. I really enjoyed this discussion. I learned a lot. And I feel like I've been following this pretty closely, but I learned a lot from you too.
Ritter,
So
that's why
thank
we
you.
have the best guests in true
You
crime.
do. You do. Hashtag best guess.
Thank you.
I think my final thoughts are just what's been coming through abundantly clear through all of the comments is that there are so many unanswered questions in this case, and I don't know if we'll ever get answers to them. And that is one of the more difficult jobs as a prosecutor. And when I was a prosecutor, I would ask people that on voir dire. I would tell them, listen, I do carry the burden. I have the burden of proof, but my burden is to prove to you the facts that will prove the elements of this crime. What I cannot do, you are all very smart people, and you're all going to have questions, and there will be little mysteries in this case, as there are mysteries throughout life. And I'm not going to be able to answer every single one of those questions. And if the jurors are expecting that they're going to come out of this case having all of these little questions answered, how did a hare stay on a vehicle after going 60 minutes traveling through the snow? Or why why do certain pieces of forensics not match up to others? And these things are what they get caught up on. Then the prosecution has got a very difficult case on their hands, because they don't just have the burden of proving the elements of their own crime. They have the burden of then answering all of these other questions that the defense has been raising throughout this. So hopefully for the prosecution, they're able to convince people that that is a lot of noise surrounding all of this. And really the question comes down to a question that they still haven't answered, which is intent. And if they get to answering that through some of these witnesses we expect to be called, then I think they'll be all right. But if they haven't, then if we're in a world of confusion, that is where the defense thrives, and they are going to be the ones to carry the day.
By the way, yesterday, I forget exactly how he put it, but Peter Ellican, who's a savvy criminal defense attorney, he said there's a horrible truth about the law. It is not a search for innocence, but a search for doubt. So the way he phrased that, it was powerful. Look at this from Pistol Pete. Joel, I don't hate you. You're opening your eyes as the days go on. I just don't know how a smart man like you can be such a dumb moron.
What a backhanded compliment that was.
Yeah.
He
Exactly.
loves you, so it's okay.
Exactly. And Sky Lazaro, we all love you. Someone already was saying you have to have her back on. She is an experienced corporate and criminal defense attorney, high profile attorney. You see her on TV, you see her on STS. Sky, by the way, I have a new tagline for our show, courtesy of La Mesa. STS rules, other channels drools. Rules. Except Motta and Ritter, we're all on the same plane. Sky, your final thoughts here. I mean, this is one of the more bizarre trials that I have ever covered. I am continuously spun around here. I don't know which way is up. I do think that these cops are covering something up, but I also do think there's a possibility that Karen Reed maybe hit him. I don't know. It's tough to say.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is a hard case, and I agree with Josh. This is why you're a prosecutor of the year, that you better explain to a jury in a case like this early on that I'm not answering all your questions. You're going to be confused, and that's okay, but here's the ultimate point that you need to come to, and here's why. I hope for the state, for the state's case, if they want to secure conviction in this, that they need to get to the point and tie it up, or I think there's a potential that too much damage is going to be done. I think the biggest problem with this case is you have a dead police officer at a home with his colleagues or other officers that he worked with and people he was friends with, and you have the same department investigating it. If you're investigating the death of one of your own, which, as I said, you shouldn't be, but if you are, aren't you doing the best damn job you can? Like, don't you want to figure out what happened to this guy? And if your position is that she did it, like, tie it all up in a really neat little bow to the best of your ability, instead of, a whole bunch of just, it's really inept, I think, what happened. And I think that's ultimately going to be a big problem for them. Like the comments, they're not calling him officer. If his own department doesn't like this guy, or at least gives the idea that maybe they didn't like him, it's, the jury maybe doesn't care as much, or maybe the defense theory is right, that's why there's these unanswered questions. So, I think there's little things like that happen in trials that, whether or not people realize that, have a really profounding effect on jurors. I've had jurors, I've talked to jurors who have gotten stuck on things in trials that I never thought, I said it in passing, or it was probably a stupid question I asked that I shouldn't have. And I thought, nobody really cares about that. It doesn't matter. And then you talk to them afterwards and they're like, I just couldn't get over this. And I'm thinking, did you listen to anything else? But that's what happens when you have people in there. So
yeah, I agree with you. It can be small things that make huge differences. I always say that in TV news. You could be interviewing the president, and if you misspell president on the chyron, which is the graphic below, no one's listening to interview. It could be the tiniest thing that influences it. So there you go. I actually learned that from a mentor of mine. The smallest mistakes in TV news are the biggest mistakes. Tomorrow, this is true. Come meet yours truly, and more importantly, my mother, who I'm exploiting according to Twitter, in person in town. She's loving every minute of it, by the way. This was tonight's dinner and book signing. All these people there, Carm center stage, basking in her glory, telling her story about being a child survivor. This, again, was the Holocaust Educational Research Council. My friend Jared Ross is there in the green shirt, closest to us. Great guy. I'm going to see him tomorrow. And we are doing, by the way, a live podcast tomorrow from a store called Hearth, not Heart, but Hearth and Soul. And we're going to be talking about justice for Dan Markel at 5:30. Tim Jansen, famed Tallahassee defense attorney. And I think Jared Ross is going to join us along with, look at this, the Carm alarm. I had to cover Bob's face for that. We did not get Bob's final words, and we will. Bob Motta is a criminal defense attorney, family law guy who now sits around and streams on YouTube all day like a big adolescent like myself. I'm a delinquent. Bob, your final thoughts.
Well, first of all, Joel, once again, thanks for putting another phenomenal panel together. Obviously, I adore Josh. Thrilled to have met Sky. I watched from afar as I viewed the Richens case as it's progressed, and I felt great empathy as a fellow defense attorney, and I'm relieved that you've been extricated out of that nightmare. So, but look, I would just caution everybody to take a breath. This is a crazy case out there. I know people are dug into positions, and that's fine. We're all human beings. We all form opinions. All I would ask is reserve your final opinion as to what may have happened to poor John O'Keefe until all the evidence is in, and then we'll all try to figure out what happened to him. It's like, that's why we have trials. Trials exist for a reason. Everything that you hear going into it is nothing but words. Them's just words. We need to hear the evidence. We need to see it vetted at trial. And once that's done, we can make educated decisions on what may have happened. And until that point, quit picking on Joel and I. We're just a couple of guys out there, like I'm on the fence, Joel's on the fence, and we're open to anything. I'm in no position to decide that something's wrong or something's right without having the full story from both sides. So, I would just hearken everybody else do that, and your life will probably be a little bit more pleasant. And just remember that at the end of the day, we're all trying to figure out what happened to poor John O'Keefe, because his family has suffered quite a bit. I mean, John was the latest son that they had lost, so that family suffered quite a bit. I just, caution everybody to keep in mind that there's a family that's suffering out there, and let's see what happens. Let's listen to the evidence. Let's watch it and come to a conclusion then.
Very, very, very well said. John O'Keefe's family's been to hell and back. He lost their daughter, lost John, lost the son-in-law. The kids lost the biological parents, and then John, who took custody. So Let's keep John in our thoughts. Carm always says we're all just trying to survive in a rough world. 5:30 tomorrow, live podcast, Justice for Dan Markel. Until then, my Geraldo Rivera homage. We love you, LA. We love you, Utah. Love you, Chicago. I'm coming to a book signing. You and Allie are going to be my
100%.
guests of honor there for sure. And of course, love you, Canton, Mass, Dedham, Mass, Norfolk. And there you go. It says it all. Guess stick around for 1 second. Yeah. Officer John O'Keefe, RIP.